Post-war Impressionism. Artworks and historical overview. The Lobster Trap and Fishtail and Stables by Alexander Calder. Royal Tide II by Louise Nevelson. The Archer by Henry Moore. QB19 by David Smith and Monogram by Robert Rauschenberg are 6 pieces of post-war Impressionism art. Each artist was born with a similar time frame, the 19th century and early 20th century. This indicates that the artists would have experienced either the First World War, the Second World War, or both. These significant historical events can significantly and indirectly impact the thought and perspective behind their art. Additionally, these artists share a sense of idealism beyond that of their time, which could be attributed to this post-war influence. Alexander Calder. Alexander Calder was born July 22, 1898, in the U.S., his main art style being kinetic art. Kinetic art is art using any medium that contains or creates movement. Often this includes three-dimensional sculptures and figures, including mobiles. Lobster Trap and Fishtail. Calder decided to combine his engineering training with his art studies and became a leading exponent of kinetic art in New York and Paris. There, Calder became increasingly interested in the biomorphic surrealism and choreography of modern dance. He soon began creating art that could move or float when exposed to air currents. According to Alexander Calder, he created Lobster Trap and Fishtail with intention to harness the performative potential of the mechanical sciences. Quote by him: "The incorporation of movement into his art strongly challenges the relationship between art and space. This piece uses movement to contrast the balance between art and reality. This assisted with its minimalistic color scheme and thin wiring. Lobster Trap and Fishtail is one of Calder's earliest hanging mobiles. It is described as the first to reveal the basic characteristics of the genre that launched his enormous international reputation and popularity." Stables. Calder's stables contributed significantly to a renaissance in public art during the later half of the century. Composed of flat, curvilinear shapes of metal welded or joined together and painted, usually red or black, these works are similar to the glass and steel confines of contemporary buildings and the free space of parks and plazas. Calder uses his artistic emphasis on kinetic energy to create a stationary piece using red paint, steel, and wire. This piece resembles a bridge-like shape, and its thick end contradicts its opposite thin-legged end. Calder, an American, was close to the group of artists who saw space as a key artistic issue, which reflects the international character of the abstract movement of this piece. Alexander Calder's most expensive piece is the Lily of Force, which is a hanging mobile that he made in 1945. It was sold in New York City for $18.5 million, making it the most expensive mobile sold in history. Louise Nevelson was born September 23, 1899, her main style of art being assemblage. Assemblage refers to a work of art formed by the grouping of found or unrelated objects. Usually, assemblage art is created on a specific substrate and consists of three-dimensional elements projecting out from the substrate. Royal Tide II. Nevelson routinely gave a single color to her sculptures in order to bring about a sense of order and to allow the components to come together as a single unit. Nevelson saw a religious renaissance within the color gold, as well as a natural and spiritual connection to the sun. She was also interested in the way it could associate her art with a timeless quality. The artist's intentional use of gold to emphasize what she was wanted to say with her piece accents the adjoined collection of wood that composes this piece of art. Though large in size, the piece's simplistic nature is quite effective. Louise Nevelson labeled Royal Tide II and similar works as her Baroque phase, which links her modern abstract sculpture with the elaborate and ornate works of the 16th century Baroque era. Louise Nevelson's most expensive piece is the Miss N's Palace. This sculpture, composed of more than 100 interconnected objects, absorbs and emanates her spirit and that of her adopted home. Her largest work, it took 13 years to complete and was unveiled on her 18th birthday. Henry Moore was born July 30th, 1898, in the UK. His main style of art being Expressionism. Expressionism was a modernist movement. Its intent is to present the world from a solely subjective perspective, distorting it for emotional effect, in order to invoke moods or ideas. The Archer. An architect asked Henry Moore to create a sculpture in alignment of his idea for the new Toronto City Hall on Nathan Phillips Square. The sculpture, although controversial at the time, is now considered part of Toronto's civic heritage. This plastered piece of art was formed into a unique and symmetrical shape. Though basic in color, the contrasting volume within the center of the piece, in comparison to its much smaller limbs, are significantly different upon a single glance. This piece is stationary, and thus has no relationship to movement. The 1960s were a time of cultural revolution in Toronto, when the historically conservative city finally fully embraced modernism in its art and architecture. This is especially exemplified in this piece, The Archer. Henry Moore's most expensive piece, known as the reclining figure. It has broken all records and exceeded all expectations, as it made a whopping $30.24 million for the Reclining Figure Festival that was estimated to attract around $5.5 million. This record has made it the most expensive piece of British sculpture ever. David Smith was born March 9, 1906, in the U.S., his main style of art being Cubism. Cubism involves geometric forms in highly abstracted works, such as cubes. It was created by Picasso and was one of the most influential art styles of the early 20th century. Constructivism was an artistic and architectural philosophy which rejected the idea of autonomous art. The movement was in favor of art as a practice for social purposes. QB19. Smith intended his QB works to be displayed outside so that the burnishing of the stainless steel would demonstrate changes in lighting conditions. The geometric forms were softened by this interaction with the environment, as Smith predicted. Smith drew inspiration from the symbols of primitive cultures. The forms on the apparent crossbeam are arranged similar to that of a still life, except that it is elevated by a vertical beam. The symmetry of the art is solely on the bottom portion of the sculpture, as the higher proportion of the sculpture is asymmetrical due to its increased height on one side. The lower symmetry is contrasted with the higher asymmetry, creating a fascinating artistic dynamic. There are 28 QB sculptures which made up the last series David Smith would create before his death in 1965. Smith once described his series as polished and compared it to the feeling of making square clouds. Most expensive piece. Not given a name, this steel sculpture had set an auction record. This piece is labeled as the most expensive piece of contemporary art ever sold at an auction. Being fought for by 5 bidders, the piece was finally sold to a man by the name of Larry Gagosian for $23.8 million. Robert Rauschenberg. Robert Rauschenberg was born October 22, 1925, in the U.S., his main style of art being assemblage. Assemblage refers to a work of art formed by the grouping of found or unrelated objects. Usually, assemblage art is created on a specific substrate and consists of 3-dimensional elements projecting out from the substrate. Monogram. Though an official intent is unclear, commentators have interpreted the piece of art as having sexual, religious, and satirical meanings due to the placement of the goat on a horizontal platform, and well as its conjoined tire. Some observers have associated it with an animal awaiting sacrifice. This piece combines several found unrelated objects together to create art. It comprises a goat placed on a horizontal platform, challenging the idea of space regarding 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional artwork. The color scheme is apparent to be brown, which is most likely an ode to the prior coloring of the goat artifact. The pattern of the platform accentuates the goat's simplicity nicely. Monogram is Rauschenberg's best-known combine and is still considered atypical when juxtaposed with his art regarding stuffed birds. Most expensive piece, Overdrive. One of the most famous silkscreen paintings, Overdrive is a parade of collaged images of city life which faithfully reflect on the visual information overload Americans encounter on a daily basis by living their urban lives. Street signs, stop signs, the Statue of Liberty, office buildings, and iron railings. This being the most expensive Rauschenberg artwork, it was sold for $14,600,000.